Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Citizens Advisory Committee workshop, specifically related to the Transportation Improvement Plan for this year. This is for the Transportation Planning Organization. This is going to be a very informal meeting in terms of Robert's rules. The idea here is to literally, as I said, workshop the tip and give everyone an opportunity to review with staff items in the tip, understand the process, ask whatever questions you have now. So hopefully we'll be more well prepared when we have our actual meeting on the tip in June, the meeting at which we'll be asked to take action and make recommendations to the board. So this is preliminary, but hopefully it'll be of benefit to everybody here. And I understand there are some people online. So if we could, Sarah, if you'd be kind enough to call the roll. Keep a record of who we have here.
Rick Fernandez.
Here.
Stephen Hollenkamp. Don't see him. Dana Lazarus.
Here virtually.
Oh, baby. All right.
I'll check on the volume after I do the attendance. Carolyn Brown. For Brandon. Don't see him. Joseph Citro.
Here.
Matt Fink.
Present.
Aya Yasmin.
Present virtually.
You, Bill Roberts. Ed. See him. Artie Fryer. Michael Carter did let me know he wouldn't be here. Chris Bella. Chris Gonzalez.
Here virtually.
Thank you. Dustin.
Here.
Idea said she wasn't gonna be here. Stephen Jones. Oh. Carmela Alexander. Nope. What?
Here.
And Humera. Okay, let me just adjust the volume. Don't think I'm getting. Okay, can someone online try talking so we can see how loud it is in the room?
Testing, testing.
Thank you.
Hello. Is that loud?
Is it better for the people in the room?
It's better for people down the hall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Honestly, I don't recall if I even introduced myself. I apologize. I'm Rick Fernandez, chair of the committee. Okay, we've made provision in the agenda for public comment. I don't see anyone in the room. Anybody hiding behind the file cabinet? Anybody here? No? Anybody online?
We don't have any members of the public at this time.
At this time, well, okay. That then takes us to item 4 on the agenda, FY 26 through 30 Transportation Improvement Program and FY 27 to 31 TPO priority list. Elizabeth Watkins of TPO staff, you have the ball.
Right. Good evening, CAC. Elizabeth Watkins, TPO staff, and I appreciate the chair's comments on how this is going to be an informal opportunity. The content from this presentation was taken directly from your direction at your May meeting. My hope for this will help empower you, get you the information that you need to make a recommendation at your June meeting. So there were a variety of requests that came from CAC members. So I went back, listened to the recording, and then grouped them under 3 separate areas. Where programmatic, big picture, funding, and then some specific projects. Again, I want this to be a dialogue, so I'm gonna pause after each subtopic, and I welcome your questions, your comments. I really want this to be collaborative. So let's start off with some of the programmatic questions and points that were brought up. If you'll recall at the meeting last month, there were a lot of questions about how did this project get into the TIP? How can I get a project in? And we thought it would be a good way to tackle that by addressing the project lifecycle as a whole, and then give a specific example of a project that's made its way from planning all the way to construction and now just in operations and maintenance. I'd also like to remind you that the Transportation Improvement Program is just one way that a transportation project is described. That's the one that is federally funded projects. There are many transportation projects, and Hillsborough County is capital improvement program, City of Tampa's. So the TIP is not illustrative of all of the transportation projects, just those that are federally funded. So to kind of walk through the life cycle, I pulled a graphic from one of DOT's resource guides for local governments. And I thought it did a really nice job of breaking it down step by step, and also providing for years, because transportation projects take a long time. And that's largely due to the complexity and the cost of these. So the first stage, of course, is planning. This is the stage where we are gathering data, talking to the public, really trying to understand what the purpose, what the problem is, and what potential solutions can help best address that. It's very much early in the process to just kind of scope things out and gather information to identify that need and to get that project, to define a transportation project. One thing you'll notice over this whole presentation is that there are way more needs than there are funds. So many times projects or needs kind of stop at the planning phase and they get tabled because maybe there aren't resources available. Maybe the data isn't clear. Maybe there isn't community buy-in on a specific treatment for a problem. So after that purpose and need is really defined, then a project moves into what's called project development and environment report. This can take anywhere from 1 to 7 years, and it does a really a technical analysis for environmental constraints, cultural, social, and analyzing the impacts and the benefits of the project. It also brings the project further in design that planning ever could. You get to about 60% design, and it really helps like identify what needs to be done. From there, you finish out design, get to 100% plans, acquire any right of way that's necessary, and then build the darn thing and maintain it afterwards. So I wanted to give an example that hits close to home for me. I'm a fifth generation Tampeño, and my parents brought me home from Women's Hospital and brought me to my childhood home in New Tampa. And back in the late 80s, New Tampa was South County. There was development and not a lot of infrastructure. So in the 1990s, community members were rallying around getting Crispy Downs widened. Again, it was just a 2-lane road, and it needed improvements with all of the development going along that corridor. So in the 1990s, there was a lot of advocacy identifying, hey, we need to do something. Then in 2000, I think the project was brought to the TPO or the MPO at the time because the county realized this is going to be a mega project for them. I think the ultimate total project cost was like over $100 million, the biggest the county had ever done. So they knew they needed to work with the MPO to get federal funds on it because local funding wasn't going to cut it. So it was added to the priority list. It was added to the long range transportation plan in about 2002. From there, the county took it through the project development environment phase, design in the early 2000s, and they finally were able to start construction in 2010. So the community rallying, hey, this is a problem from the 1990s till something just started construction in 2010 was about 20 years, which is frustrating, but that is just kind of the nature of these big mega projects. And then ultimately, the project was completed in 2018. So it took almost 3 decades from people saying, hey, we need something to it's built. So it's complicated, it is expensive, but it's worthwhile because Crispy Downs has totally transformed New Tampa. So I want to pause there and see if there are questions about the cycle, if there are anything you have on that.
Thank you. Being that it's such a long process, I think as a community member, it's frustrating, but also in this process, because it takes so long, I think there's often times where the community feels like they don't have input or gets beyond the point of where they no longer can advocate for their belief systems. So in this, setup, what areas or what stage is community input the most important? And then at what stage are hands tied and no longer applicable?
That's a great question. In my experience, it has to be early. It has to be in planning and in that project development environment stage. Because that's when everything's open. But it's hard because it takes a while. Sometimes the community changes over, but earlier, the better.
Okay, and then so being that Americans are fickle and kind of change things, 3 decades is a long time for policy and the way that people, look at the future. At what point is it no longer, like if someone's now becomes aware of a project, because we notice it, when is it no longer viable for community input or changes?
I think it really depends on the type of project. I think up through design, changes can be made because you're still finalizing. But once you get into acquiring property and building, it's really difficult for the engineers to make changes without kind of starting.
Got it.
And I'll just add on to that, and what Elizabeth was saying. You can never say never, right?
Right.
And a lot of the people who are programming funding have constituents that they report to, but I think Elizabeth really hit on, which is like, at a certain point, if you go to make changes, you're starting back at the drawing board a little bit, and so it adds more time, it adds more money. So generally, like she said, by the time you hit design, it's getting late, and then the optimal time is that these first stages, planning and beginning. But you never know what can happen, but usually by the time it's required right away, it's really hard to change your mind.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions at this point? No?
Off the cuff. Material prices for any type of construction, I know can that be a variable at any time to offset any project that has gotten the go-ahead, acquiring land, planning and designing, everything is set, ready to go? Is there a process where you can lock in material costs so that doesn't have an effect on the future of the project?
That's a really great question. I have an answer to what I've heard from DOT, but I want to go back to like Public Works or DOT because they're the ones that deliver. My understanding is the bigger agencies like Department of Transportation can stock up some materials, but at the end of the day, like you can't pre-purchase asphalt. So there's not only so much cost savings.
And if I may, one more question. Have you personally ever seen a project that has either been halted or slowed down to a point where it may be halted because of certain changes, which I was asking?
Absolutely. Happens a lot. I don't know if Sarah and Johnny, if you want me to think of a specific project, but I know, at the end of the day, we try to be as data driven as possible in this industry, but it's political as well. So if there's a lot of pushback, even up through right away, they'll put the brakes. At that point, it's very hard to restart it. When I'm struggling to identify a project locally.
That's all right. I've been very vague. So my last question, if I may, Mr. Chair. Looking at what we know for material costs and changes of administration, both on the federal and the state level, from 2002, when a project is first conceived, to 2018, 2020, that price structure or the funding structure could change everything at any point of the project, especially up to putting shoveled into the dirt.
We're seeing that all the time. That's why you see my face a lot at tip amendments.
And I don't like seeing your face.
But just not only the cost of materials, but labor also has just skyrocketed. And people who deliver transportation projects, they're often seeing, they'll check in and do cost estimates, and then it's even higher. So it particularly in this era we're in, it's just such a moving target, and it's always up. It's never down in terms of overruns.
Thank you, sure.
Absolutely. Any other questions or comments at this point?
Kind of, thank you, I appreciate it. Just out of curiosity, has there ever been a discussion on, or is there a methodology to fast track things through this? Like, when I look at it and we see, the difference between, 1 to 7 years in PD&E, like, has there ever been a process or I don't know, rubric set up to kind of keep you through a quicker process?
That's a great question. So, yes, typically at the federal level, you've got federally funded projects, there's more red tape. So locally, I know there's a lot of strategies that agencies can do to accelerate. So one example that comes to mind for me is something called design build. So it's an innovative financing tool where you can put a project out for a builder to do. And instead of waiting all the way till construction, you say, okay, you can design the project as well, give us a cost estimate, and then that often has time and money savings, but you wouldn't want to do design build for every project, it's usually for those mega ones. So there are ways to find efficiencies in this process, depending on the scope.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Online?
Anyone online, if you could raise your hand? I don't see anyone with a comment online right now.
And just editorially, the concept that we've been nibbling around here is the idea of a project being beyond the point of no return. The magic language that we've been playing with now for the better part of 5 years, trying to figure out what it means and when it actually puts a stake in the ground. And y'all were kind enough to give us an appendix for projects that were apparently identified as being beyond that point. So I just want to make sure that
There's a slide.
we kind of keep our eye on that ball. Matt brought it up, but didn't use the magic words, so I just want to use the magic words, and we'll get to it later, I'm sure. Go ahead.
But this is timely, so we'll talk about it later, but while we have this slide up, the point of no return, or the point in which a project has advanced to the design stage or preliminary engineering, is somewhere in between here. So just for everybody's reference, it comes between wrapping up the environmental report and then going into design, really closing out that key opportunity like Matt was asking about when to give input and really change the scope of the project. So if there isn't anything else on project lifecycle, I'll transition to the next topic. Yes.
Let me just, I think it's not really a question, just make a comment, come upon this so many times. To have somebody say that a project is going to be stopped during the PD&E phase, that's something I really haven't seen in this room in the 7-8 years that I've been here. What I have heard from staff, what I've been more often from FDOT, was, let it get through PD&E and see where we are, and then we can come back to it later and figure out whether or not we wanted to progress. Problem with that is, and when it comes back 6 months or a year later, somebody else from FDOT or wherever stands at that podium and tells it, oh, well, in that year since we last talked about this, we've gotten somehow magically beyond the point of no return. Sorry, no can do now. That's the problem that we've come upon. And I guess we're going to continue to come upon it because nobody seems to really be able to define it. Not even David Gwynn, God bless him. So anyway, go ahead.
I just got one thing here.
Yeah.
I'm looking at all this. My thinking is how. It seems like we're always behind the curve on all this stuff. Right? And it doesn't seem like there's any way of getting ahead of the curve, but it's almost like we should be ahead of the curve. And I understand it's hard to plan out 20 years in advance. Right? But I mean, if you have somewhat of an idea, which is where I think some of these guys say, well, let's get us to the PD&E. At least they can have the idea of how this is gonna look and decide from there moving forward. But it just, I don't know. For me, it just seems like there should be a way that we could, as what Matt was saying, see if we can fast track some of these things. But does it require more money? Is that what's gonna do it? Is it, I mean, you throw politics in there and I think politics is a temporary thing because it's like in the military, you know? We'd have a commander, nobody likes him. Hey, give him 2 or 4 years, he's out the door and we get somebody else. You know, same thing with politics in that way. But I don't know, I'm just curious on how it is that this area seems to be so far behind the ball on a lot of these projects that are needed. Yet you're not gonna see any sort of relief until maybe 15, 20 years down the road, which now you just exacerbated a problem. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, let's try to get back on track. That discussion will require at least 2 or 3 beers. We're not gonna be able to do it in this room, and we're not gonna be able to do it in sunshine, unfortunately. Anyway, go ahead.
I'll share, two things. One is that sometimes you'll see the projects that come to us follow this very long process because they're federally funded. You might see local projects happen faster because, they might be smaller dollar amounts, so they might not be the same magnitude of project, but the local projects do tend, to sometimes go at a faster pace than the federal ones for a range of reasons. The other thing I'll say about, an example of a project that moved much faster than it was originally intended is if people were around when the governor announced the Gateway Expressway project, which is now pretty much finished as part of the bigger Tampa Bay Next, but it's the part in Pinellas. That was on the forward Pinellas at the time that Pinellas MPO's priority list in the 12, and the governor announced funding for it probably a little less than 10 years ago, and they were able to move it a lot faster when that happened. And that's an example of how sometimes political things might change how a project happens. And
Elizabeth.
Next question that was raised by a CAC member was, what does regionally significance even mean? As you'll recall, projects in the TIP are one, federally funded, but if they're not federally funded and regionally significant, they must also be in the TIP. I think this person was asking the question because he saw a need in his neighborhood and he thought that that facility or that road rose to the bar of regional significance. So I provided the definition and statute of what regional significance is, and it's super helpful. A transportation project on a facility that serves a regional transportation need. But it goes on to give some examples, which you'll see kind of some trends through. It's all about these regional destinations, whether that be a major activity center like a mall or a big hospital facility or something, that a big employment center that brings not just local traffic, but regional traffic. So there's a higher bar for what regional significance means in the context of the TIP. And in our proposed TIP, all projects that are regionally significant that meet that definitions already have federal funds and are already described. So there are no projects that are locally funded and regionally significant. 2 examples of what a regional significant project looks like is like West Shore Interchange. People from Pinellas use it, Polk, Hillsborough, and then any projects around, you know, an interstate I-275, I-4, because that is a intra and inter-regional facility. So I wanted to provide that. There's some questions.
So you're saying just for this time frame of 26 to 30, there's no regionally significant projects out there?
That are locally funded.
Okay, locally funded, gotcha.
And that number wasn't in here right now, but for the. So we're on to Christine's question, which was a really interesting one about what are the impacts, what impacts are we seeing from Live Local on our transportation network? And I want to caution all of this with Live Local is extremely complicated. This is a law that was passed in 2023, amended in 24, and amended in 25. I am not a land use or housing planner, but I'm going to give you my best effort to help explain it if you're not familiar. So the intent of this legislation was to encourage more affordable housing throughout Florida. And it essentially enables administrative approval, so essentially a fast tracking of any multifamily or mixed-use residential development if it meets two conditions. One, it's currently zoned for commercial, industrial, or mixed use. And then two, that they provide at least 40% of affordable units for at least 30 years. The developer must demonstrate that they can deliver the project with affordable housing requirements and that it maintains its affordability over that 30-year life cycle. So the direct answer to Christine's question is it's way too soon to tell what impacts Live Local are having on our transportation network. But I wanted to give you some context of what it's looking like here in Hillsborough. So this may look a little bit difficult to see, but Sarah will circulate the sides. There are only 5 developments in unincorporated Hillsborough County that went under that Live Local provision. None of them have been constructed yet. But the county is closely monitoring this. In the city of Tampa, there are about less than 10 projects, and this one here near Belmont Heights is the one that is the furthest along. The development is Madison Highlands. The first phase of it has been built, but the affordable housing unit still hasn't been built. So that complex is still under development. So what I wanted to make sure you knew is that this is evolving. There aren't that many sites that have used this flexibility of administrative approval to fast track their development for affordable housing, but it's something all the local governments are monitoring. That's all I have on that.
Yeah, sure, if I may, and I'm gonna get sassy, but not at you. Besides Belmont Heights, all the other Live Local plans for affordable housing that are being bought, for affordable housing to be truly affordable, you have to have public mass transportation. And none of the other, besides Belmont Heights, none of the other developments have any public mass transportation near them. So why is the Live Local? Again, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be sassy. Sorry about that. It's just a dying question.
I don't believe transit is a component in Live Local at all, but it should be, because you're right, housing and transportation are so closely linked.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just for giggles, could you bring that topic back to the tip? I appreciate your answering Christine's question, but bring that in for a landing relative to why we're here tonight.
I think that came up when we were discussing how projects get into the tip and what the needs are. And
I'll chime in.
I just don't remember how that came up.
Elizabeth, is on the right track. It came up when we were talking about the priority list, not the tip, because we talked about the tip first, and then we had the priority list presentation. We were discussing the priority list and needs and how needs get identified and through the process. That's when Christine asked about the impacts of Live Local on the transportation network.
I'll live with that. Okay, thank you.
So moving on to the next subtopic is the point of no return, or also how it's defined in statute are those projects which have advanced to the design stage of preliminary engineering. Chair already gave a summary about that. I just wanted to point it out for everyone's attention that this is in statute, that any project that has advanced again to that design stage of preliminary engineering between PD&E and design may be removed only by joint action of the TPO and FDOT. So really what this gets at is projects can't be removed from the tip unilaterally by the TPO board at a certain point in the process.
And as I mentioned earlier, it is provided an appendix. I don't know what page it was. Hopefully you guys had a chance to take a look at it. The page number that's imprinted here in the lower right hand of my copy is either 239 or 314. I don't know which of those is actually associated with the online version. And that there is a grid, a series of grid documents following that has the listing of the projects that have been identified. How did these particular projects get pulled? Who identified them for you?
I did that, and the way I got there was identifying any major projects, so any widening, interchange improvement, or fixed skyway transit. Any of those projects that have preliminary engineering programs for fiscal year 26. And that's consistent with our past practice of how we've done this analysis.
Okay, all right, thanks.
So the final programmatic question is, there was a question if TPO staff analyzes the projects in the tip with any sort of environmental justice analysis. And it will be in the final document, but I just wanted to provide a map that we do that. We overlay all of those major projects with our environmental justice areas, which are a subset of low income, ethnic minority, as well as racial minority. And what this analysis found was the projects that are in areas, EJ areas, are the street park extension, as well as the projects along I-275. So that analysis will be included in the route.
And by that analysis, you mean that map, or is there actual text that goes along with it that explains it that wasn't in our package?
Yes, it's still in draft, but it's essentially a memo. So there's a series of maps and analysis of those projects. So it's text and maps.
How long ago was this analysis done?
A week ago.
Okay.
I'm sorry, was that a week? Just
So I have a quick question. Yeah, so on the LRTP, I brought this up, I think last year around the same time. Have buckets and like real choices when not driving. So there is a bucket where it's need assessment for equity. Why are we not really seeing that bifurcated among the other groups for organizing, prioritizing projects?
That's a great question, and I'll start. Maybe Johnny or Sarah, you can help add. I think the intent of that analysis was it was going to be interwoven through all of our LRTP buckets to cross project types, so that we promote projects that have positive benefits for equity.
Yeah, and I think, like, we talked about, I think in some previous meetings, the projects that make it to the priority list, a lot of the time, they include other pieces and we assign them a bucket for the sake of trying to give it a home that is what's most like it. But what we see is that a lot of the projects, especially the major projects, include other components in them. And they're not separated out. So some of them, for example, might be building sidewalks when you're doing a road project. But we are not able, through the way we get the projects, to parse out a percent, like this percent of this or this of that. And the hope is that those things are incorporated into projects that they're going in that area. The other piece of it is that for the project to make it on the priority list, we have to have a government sponsor. And so if the particular local government or entity that would be able to do it is submitting the project to us, then it's not getting prioritized.
So if someone were to come to this committee, say, I'd like to have a sidewalk in my street, that's just practically within a mile of my block, they couldn't petition TPO, but have to be somebody, a board member on that TPO to petition.
Most often we get the projects from the government entity. So the city of Tampa submits to us every year a list of projects. Hillsborough County submits a list of projects, Temple Terrace, and City Park. So those entities could, you're certainly welcome to stay in public comment or something like that, that these are your concerns. And then, of course, have board members who sit there and might hear it, but they are driven by those government workers.
I think I think what you're saying makes sense. There's soundness to it. My biggest issue, I think, is clarity. How does equity scored and rated these projects because when we look at the list, we really don't know that you guys have put this much effort into it. And when it comes to highway widening or something, even if it's like deepening channels going to the port, right, that could impact the river. It'd be nice to know that there has been a checkpoint where some type of sort of card analysis where the public's aware that, yes, there was some eyes on that, because I think you see that big list and they're like, some of these projects, it's like, wait a minute, how could you do this? Because it's gonna be more soot from my backyard. It's gonna be really loud, you know, so why is anybody really looking at this? And then we don't really, well, I don't personally see that reflected from your website and media you guys push out as buckets, if you will, and the CIP. And I know you're saying that it's hard because it's expensive, but if there is a way to showcase that, not like the federal government's gonna be very sympathetic to equity things right now, but still, I think working on that would help. Because that's been a struggle with me, just to see that effort you guys are putting in right now reflected to the final product.
What's next?
All right, now we're moving to funding. So I believe it was, Ed who brought up that over and over we hear transit is a community priority. What are the programs that don't traditionally go to transit projects, but have that eligibility? So I went through the FTOT work program and a variety of different guidance documents and try to identify those programs that often go to highway projects, but maintain eligibility for transit. But there are a few important caveats. Many of these are only eligible for capital expenses, so building a bus stop, buying a bus. Many of them are not eligible for operating, which is the lion's share of the cost of having bus service or any kind of transit service. And all of these programs are grants, right? So there's a match required and they're short term. So this is the list that I could come up with that are typically used on non-transit projects, but again, maintain that eligibility. But it's not one size fits all. There are complexities within each program. They all have their individual requirements. And the main issue that I've observed over my career is we need a dedicated local source for transit funding, because you can't match these grants if you don't have a sustainable transit source. Hence, I hope I'm not going too far out, why this White Hart's proposal to look at its charter to increase this millage would be very important to fill that need in a local funding source. So here's the list I come up with. The ones that are highlighted, those are ones that currently go to transit. You'll notice that the Surface Transportation Block Grant, that's one of the programs that the TPO has full discretion over. We regularly use that highway funding for new buses and improvements on the bus stops. So I know that was kind of a lot, but are there any questions?
SUSA, what does that stand for?
So federal funds are often broken up by population. So SU is that program urban. So that's for us. SA is that program that can be spent anywhere and is at the discretion of FDMT.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So, I think I saw in our emails, Dana might have mentioned something about, and it could be the wrong person, but toll revenue, the state is, to be clear, like, is there any toll revenue that's collected by the state that goes at all to state sponsored or attached transit? Or any of the counties or MPOs?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I know regularly District 7 has a pot of that toll revenue that it can help PSTA part match some of their big federal grants. I believe they're using, I won't even go there, but yes, that's practice.
So it's just basically contingent on what's available per year, and then if the agency decides to say, hey, we're gonna go after this money with a grant. So that's how it typically works.
Yeah, so they gotta have the project, they gotta have the timelines match up,
Right.
the eligibility, so it's a huge puzzle piece that happens.
Thank you. Give an example of that. Have anything that's been done with that?
Yeah. Maybe a good recent example is some of the improvements along the Florida, Tampa, and Seminole Heights, and in Tampa Heights, where DOT is using some of their SA funding and a discretionary grant to put in sidewalks, build bus stops for their hopefully eventual bus rapid transit line. And then also bring those stations up to code so that'll be ADA accessible. So there are many projects that are highway that have transit elements in them and use highway funds to advance transit.
Thank you. Yep.
I understand Dana Lazarus has something to say. Dana, you're recognized.
Thank you. To be honest, it's a little hard to hear through the speaker. So, Sarah or Elizabeth, was the question that Chris asked which programs are through the state? Oh, I can't not.
Can you hear? Is this clear or is it still fuzzy?
That's better. Hello?
Sorry. I believe the question was, gosh, I'm so sorry. I had a rough night with my 1-year-old.
Could you repeat your question?
Sure. My question was, does any of the toll revenue collected by the state, is set aside for transit funding for counties or MPOs? And the response was yes, but it's at the discretion of FDOT, and it would be in the form of a grant. And that the transit agencies would have to have a plan at first and then would have to coordinate to get those grants in motion.
Okay.
That would make sense.
Thank you so much. And so then my question's different, and that is what are any of the listed grant programs state or are they all federal? I see strategic intermodal system, that rings as a state program, but are there additional ones to the ones on the list that are state programs for transit?
I don't believe so, other than Chris's good point about the toll revenues, which I didn't see in the work program instructions. But yeah, the state pots are district dedicated revenue, strategic intermodal system, state public transit, state New Stars transit program, and the remaining are, and the county incentive grant program. The remaining are federal.
Got it. Thank you.
Then kind of related, there was a question on which of the federal highway funds could be flexed to FTA. That was a question from Ed. I linked a recent guidance document from the Federal Transit Administration that identifies what those federal programs are and their eligibility to be moved basically from highway to transit. I'm just
Quick question about the funding. Just for my own education here, like, let's just say someone's feeling generous and the state wants to do a pilot program where they would fund additional monies to counties. Have you ever heard of like a temporary funding program at all, or are these all like permanent? Just
from a state perspective, it really depends on the legislature
okay.
on what they come up with. I know one of the funding programs, the Transportation Regional Incentive Program, that was created kind of for MPOs to have a bigger voice, and that kind of came out of nowhere. From a federal level, we saw a really big change going from the FAST Act to the bipartisan infrastructure law. So who knows what we'll see with this next reauthorization bill, which is set to be done next fall. So we'll be starting to hear, we'll see what this administration wants to change, but I would expect to see some changes to programs.
Just keep going.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, let's dive into some specific projects. So, there was a question about the South Coast Greenway, particularly about that Big Bend overpass that's programmed in the tip for construction in 29. And I think the question was really about that alignment of where is this going? And truthfully, the overpass over Big Bend Road hasn't been fully finalized because design is gonna happen in the next year or so. But here's the schematic and that light pink, if you can see it, where the current alignment is, or at least the Burn Watershed. And it will go over Big Bend somewhere between Watershed, which is right here, and Covington Garden Drive. So within here somewhere, there will be an overpass so that the trail can continue over Big Bend, which is, you know, a major artery. There were some questions about the Fowler Avenue safety and operational improvements. The question was, what type of mid-block crossing will be implemented? So I got with DOT, and the intention is to have a few pedestrian signals, full signals. So I took an example from one that is currently installed on Bush Boulevard. So it will be a full signal, it stops traffic, it's not just flashing yellow lights. So we can expect to see these construction on Fowler in the next few years.
What is the system that does red lights called versus the flashing? I know there's a name for it, but I don't know what it is. Would you happen to know? A hawk? Okay, and the other one is called a,
RND.
okay, thank you.
And that was an acronym, so.
Moving on, there was a question about what an auxiliary lane is. You may recall that there are two I-4 auxiliary lanes. Going to be either in right of way or construction in the tip. One in unincorporated county on the east side and the one in Plant City. To just provide an example of an auxiliary lane. Traditionally, it's between two exit ramps to help ensure the flow of traffic and safety, to give folks opportunities to move over through those general purpose lanes.
I have a quick question about that.
You're recognized.
The auxiliary lane itself, is there any, I guess, is there any way that it could become something else, like meaning that it could become a toll collecting lane? Is that a possibility, or is it really set in stone that an auxiliary lane is only to help kind of usher in traffic and usher out traffic? Because I mean, share my, not recall, but I do, like, I saw this language being percolated into the tip, like TVNX, somewhere around 2019, 2020. And I was like, I've never remembered this in 2015. I mean, have you heard, or is there any like indication this is a placeholder that could be something else? Okay, yeah, it's a little unnerving when we see a lot of terminologies. I mean, when I was looking through the tip, I didn't even realize they called Tampa Bay Next TBN, you know, so it's stuff like that, like kind of makes me a little uneven, you know, it's like, we're seeing this and sure, it sounds great on paper, but what does it really mean in the long term? Because as I think he pointed out, a lot of these projects are very long term and some things can be tweaked. We saw HOV become express toll lanes from the original TIS to Tampa Bay Next. So that's why I would love to have some information about that if possible, because I know we float terminologies.
Yeah, I'll recognize myself. Auxiliary lanes. Auxiliary lanes, God bless them, had a lot to do with why the original TBX project fell on its face back in 2017. Because there was a misunderstanding as to what auxiliary lanes on the Howard Franklin Bridge were. And the intention of DOT was to take away an auxiliary lane, and instead of using that space for general use, that they were going to convert that space for express lane, toll lanes. People over time had used that auxiliary lane as a general use lane, and they came to appreciate it as a free lane. And now DOT was claiming that they had the right to remove that because it was on auxiliary lane and convert that space for a toll. That did not go over well, and ultimately wound up losing some people some jobs, and that's how we wound up with win instead of Steinman. Now, back in 2017 and 2018, right around in there. I think Joe may have been on city council or on the TPO board at that time. I was just a guy out in the neighborhood, but it was all very confusing. But the use of these auxiliary lanes is problematic. And it adds a certain level of flexibility that doesn't always weigh to the benefit of the public. In that case, it didn't weigh very favorably to the benefit of the DOT and some staff. So it's important that they define them very clearly and what the intent is long term. That's my little trip down memory lane. I apologize.
Actually, very timely for our second to last slide. Sharon, you inquired about the managed lane strategy for
Yeah.
section 5 from West Shore to the downtown Tampa corridor. And when I reached out to DOT, they reiterated that that strategy has not been determined, but it is typically made later in the design phase.
And we have no idea what point in time that would likely be here.
We'll ask every year.
Yeah, oh, we have. Okay. All right.
So I just wanted to leave you with a QR code for our interactive map. I thought this might be a good way to digest the tip instead of going through 250 pages, almost 200 projects. So it's on our website. There's a QR code here. If you have any questions between now and your June meeting, I'd be happy to field those.
I have a request. This kind of falls under the general rubric of old dog trying to learn new trick. I'm the old dog. You good folks have been presenting the tip in a particular format in a package for years. And I got used, Johnny, after a while to just looking for table 1, table 2, table 3, and I kind of knew how to maneuver my way through those and identify the 7 or 8 line items in table 2 that I cared about, and that's where I focused my time and energy. I can't figure out how to do that with this package. So is there someone in the room that can help to kind of give us a roadmap, no pun intended, a roadmap how to best navigate our way through this document to get to the line items that we need in order to make motions to strike, to amend, or whatever it is we might do next month? Is that muddy enough, or do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
If you want, I can share my screen from my computer here and then maybe look at it, you can talk us through what we're looking at. Sure, if that's okay. Are you interested in the tip or the priority list?
Right now, I'm interested in the tip. I imagine the priority list would be helpful too, but yeah, I want to know how to get to the 250 page document, not spend the next week trying to figure out what I could do in about 2 hours before. I don't know how to do it with this.
Yes. So you're interested in table 1 and table 2. That has now been moved to a separate document called the priority list. So that was included in the email
Okay.
that Sarah sent out.
So the TPO priority list that we have in the document now would have been presented as table 1 and table 2 last year.
Yes.
I think you may have even told us that last meeting, and it did a flyby, but that sounds familiar now. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So Sarah is going through the priority list. We just added some narrative to contextualize it. We're trying this out as staff because the tip is very different than the priority list. They're related, but they serve 2 different purposes. So that table 2 that maybe you would look at and strike, that is going to be this table. It will look very familiar. This is that table. Table 2. And then following this is the former table 1. Those are the priorities that are programmed for construction, meaning they have funding assigned to them, but it might not be until fiscal year 28. We like to keep our eye. So this is the old table 1.
Okay.
So if you're gonna look at projects for recommendations to scratch or move around, that's this document.
Perfect. Thank you. Getting old, I can't spend that much time.
Changing things up, so I'd love your feedback after this cycle on maybe something we could do differently next time.
Well, that'll expedite things for me anyway, Chris.
Very basic question, going back in time, this one, because I remember hearing this discussion about priority lists, but, what does it mean to be on a priority list versus being on tip? Like, what benefits does that project get? And are they really true benefits, or is it just kind of like modeling on a runway and hoping like someone's gonna buy the clothes?
So that's an excellent question. An analogy, but no, there is merit to being on this priority list. So being on the former table 2, the meat of this document that Sarah has shown, the primary use of it is to tell DOT, these are our priorities in rank order. The TPO has a pot of funding. Go down our list and see how far you can get before that funding is exhausted. That's a primary way it's used. Another way that the priority list is used is a way to communicate to DOT. Hey, we see you have a project going on US 301, and hey, we have a need at SIMS in 301. How can we add our local priorities into a project priority? That's another benefit. And then the third, maybe less weight, is to have this on this list for just to show community support. Say HARD is going after a discretionary grant, it helps bolster their application to say, hey, this is a documented priority. Check out this list. So those are kind of the 3 ways that it's used.
But it's not like guaranteed, like, for example, if I were to somehow put CSX as the #1 priority, right? But it's not guaranteed it's gonna happen at least, but it just gets a little buzz with it. If there's some grants out there for it, and
That's a perfect example for that third category. But you'll see it in the presentation again in June. But there are, I think, about 12 projects that are actively competing for that funding. So we'll call those out individually. So it's used in a variety of ways, but you're right. There are some projects that, even though it's on this list, it might not advance because there's not the money, it's not far enough in design, a multitude of reasons.
okay, thanks.
Okay, another rumor that Dana has a question. Dana, you're recognized.
Thank you. Quick follow-up to that. So nothing, just to make absolutely sure, you can't get a project in the tip unless it's on the LOP. Is that correct?
So the TIP, again, is the list of the federally funded transportation projects. So the lion's share of the projects in the TIP come from DOT and they come from HARD. The priority list is where we communicate to DOT, hey, fund this with the TPOs have allocated funds, or help work those needs in, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Maybe my question wasn't understood. Projects can't jump the LOP and go directly to the TIP. Like if a project has to be on the list of priority projects in order to be put in the TIP.
The LOP is the list of priority projects, and Elizabeth, maybe I can start to send you can add to it. Projects can be in the transportation improvement program, the TIP, without being in the list of priority projects. That is because the transportation improvement program has funding sources that are beyond what the TPO prioritizes. And so projects might be in the transportation improvement program if FDOT is using state funding, for example. That project would be in the transportation improvement program, especially if it's combined with federal funding. But if it's not one of the pots that the TPO prioritizes in our priority list. We primarily prioritize the surface transportation funding pot, but there are some others that we also influence. But there are then further others that are not ones that we do that for. And so projects that are using those funding sources may go straight from whatever project development area and our programming to the transportation improvement program without being on the priority list.
That's really interesting. But okay, so the question I wanted to ask is I looked through the tip and the state public transit or DPTO funds are, looks like primarily used to fund airport infrastructure. And I'm just wondering if you know a little more about that state public transit funding source and why it seems to be, I mean, I did see like a Hart Transit facility, but the lion's share is for airport infrastructure.
Take that. So I think that's more of it says DPTO, but it's because like DOT's modal office handles everything that's on highways. So there are airport projects, seaport transit, but an airport would never get transit funds. There is a trust fund for airports that are state revenues. Those are the only things that would go. So I will still go back and just double check the fund code and make sure that that's not an error. But I can speak with absolute certainty that funds that are allocated for transit are in a separate budget and would never go to an airport project unless it was like provide service to the airport. Like it would absolutely be for transit.
Definitely check that because I just did a keyword search for DPTO and the fund is next to a lot of Tampa International Airport stuff, and some of the other airports. So yeah.
I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Follow up on that.
Any other questions online?
Anyone else online, if you could raise your hand, or if you're having trouble raising your hand, just put in the chat that you'd like to speak and I'll call on you, or as the chair call on you. No one else online.
Before you wander on, and I'm sorry, I feel really slow after doing this as long as I have. I should have known this, but all right, I'm looking at what I copied TPO priorities, which I'm now setting aside as the old table 1 and table 2, right? Okay, I'm comfortable with that. I like that, something like that. All right. Now, there are 2 other lists, at least 2, in this 250-page deposit document. One is Project Priorities Program for Construction, and the other is federally funded, regionally significant. We've used that terminology earlier in the meeting. I don't know that we've talked about Project Priorities Program for Construction or not. Either way, how do those 3 lists interact with each other? I mean, is stuff in this list and this list, will that show up on the TPO priority list? So I don't have to worry about these other 2? How does that work? Am I confusing you?
I'm sorry, I need some backup, just make sure somebody's not in the weeds.
Okay, sorry.
Fill it out, yeah.
So, the project priorities program for construction is the old table 1. And that is in the priority list behind what was table 2. So when you think of what was table 1, that starts now on page 31 of the priority list. And table 2 is before it. And the reason that we have this together is that while these projects are programmed for construction, if they need more money for construction or something else goes crazy, they must stay on the priority list in order to be eligible for that increase.
And if you're thinking about the overlap, project priorities program for construction will absolutely be in the tip because there's construction funding program. So for growth simplicity, the priority list is essentially a wish list. And the tip is the budget, is not the budget, is what's funded. If that helps.
And some projects are both.
Yeah.
And this hopefully will be the last question. This is more to help me. I think maybe somebody collaboratively would benefit from it. I just want to be clear. As we prepare for the meeting in June, our meeting in June, we would be well served focusing on the TPO priority list as the real focus of our review and determining what items we may or may not want to support, what motions to strike or to amend we may or may not want to make. This is the seminal document, the TPO priority document, right?
Yes, that is the document that the board can make meaningful changes to. So your recommendations could be more acted upon by the board.
Okay, all right. Right, and I said anything that's going to confuse the issue for anybody.
That's me. That's
Okay, all right. Well, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna focus on this, which is a relatively small slice of the 250 pages. You just made my life a lot easier. I just want to make sure that that's the intention. Okay,
As a recommendation, if you're interested in what is programmed in over the next 5 years, take a look at that interactive map. And that's a great way to digest the former table 3, all of the projects that have current funding on them, and see, look around the things that you care about. And if you have any questions about those projects, it would be great if you brought those to the June meeting so that we could answer your questions.
all right. Thanks. Good. You have more
No more content.
questions, comments? From Chris?
So for the downtown interchange, obviously that's under construction. There seems to be a little confusion if when a project's in construction, does it include the beautification elements? Or would that be later on, whenever that discretion of the DOT? Because what I've noticed on, where Rick Fernandez lives, like his area, one thing I was tracking for almost 30 some years was the trail. And it seemed like in 2012, we finally got that trail over there. And some like really skinny little trees, and that was it. It's supposed to be more, but my point is that came in significantly later after the project was completed in 2006. I'm talking about the interchange. So in the case of right now, current construction, is the beautifications involved a part of that budget, or is that going to be something separate?
It's a great question and just point overall. So yeah, those landscaping costs are typically bundled under construction. But you make a good point about the delay, because often a project is in the TIP when it's programmed for construction. But when it's completed is often years after that. So it'll fall out of the TIP. But there's still a lot of improvements to go along. So my recommendation would be, if there are certain projects you're interested in following along, let's maybe through Sarah, keep an eye on those, and we can ask DOT for updates on their landscaping or any beautifications that were identified in the project.
Right, because I think what I'm concerned about is if there is things that we want to happen, that we were told that was going to happen, it might be very irritating to the TPO board, and they would have to discuss this again, subsequent years when it's supposed to be done by 2027. So, I mean, is it possible to know an answer before the actual TIP hearing,
On
or
a specific project.
just for the interchange, like we're focusing on that, yes.
Okay.
Because at least where the park where I live at, there was some discussion of having park, but I don't know what that park looks like, if it's really gonna be a park or if it's gonna just be a swamp. So, is it really gonna happen when this project wraps up in 27, or are we gonna officially discuss that business later on, post 27? And I just get a little concerned, because then it's like we're opening up the can of worms again, and I think a lot of commissioners are probably really just wanting to get done. Because it's been agonizing since, I think the project was actually presented to TPO in 2013. I found some records, so it's been a really long time. So if it's possible to find out before the big day, that'd be awesome.
Certainly, I could just restate it back to you to make sure I understand. So for the DTI in particular, we want to know,
I can give you work program number if you want.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's even easier, and we'll get with DOT on
Yeah.
the scope of beautification improvements and a timeline.
Yeah, just a beautification, and it's affecting, so the work program number is 445057-1-52-01. And, it's edging on Tampa Heights, PM and historic Ybor, so I just want this to be kind of our priority Q&A on it because it's affecting the core neighborhoods that are impacted by this. I would just like to know if I'm gonna ever see something. I'm sure Rick would like to know, on his side, if he's ever gonna see something, so it's just interesting to get that information up front. And if it's not included in TIP, that's okay, just kind of want to know, is it really covering? And I have one more big question, I think I asked Sarah this through email, but assist project, like an interstate widening project, that, even if the NPO, or sorry, the TPO board were to say, we don't want this because the citizens, that can never go away because it's a assist project. Is that correct? So meaning that even if Hillsborough County TPO were to outright reject it, the state would still build it. Is that like how assist would work in that circumstance?
So I think it's less about assist and it's more about, coming to the table, DOT, TPO board, community, and talking about that project, because you're right, technically in the statute, like,
I feel like,
you can't, like, just yank a project out, that's passed by your design. But I think there's still, and I think District 7 has showed this, that there's still opportunities to hear from the TPO board, to hear from the community and try to find consensus where they can. I don't know if Johnny or Sarah have anything to add to that.
let me just elaborate just a little bit. It's kind of what I was saying about the equity, the needs for assessing for equity. It was the expectations of someone coming to a public hearing and wanting to have significant change for their community. It's a little bit blurred, and so I think and how these projects are organized, it's an assist project. I don't know if it's shown in the tip, usually it is, I think I recalled it. I think it should be clear to any advocate or, someone who wants to be a community partner, know that that's never really gonna go. It's always going to be, and the reason why I bring this up is because I think a lot of us come to the tip hearings thinking that there is a high level of flexibility in these projects, but there's actually a certain portion of the projects on the list that are untouchable, right? And so I think that needs to be indicated to the public at large, because I'm just speaking of the interstate, there could be other projects, of course, but the expectations of, and for it to be clear to the public, should be noted on the actual TIP document. I know it's like hard to probably formalize that in language, but I just think it's kind of like, these are state sponsored, so therefore they're never gonna go away, right? And usually when I went to DC and when I went on an FHWA like tour with DOT, we were all under the impression that we could do that change, but then it seemed like when we got back to Florida, the rules were different because of this. So I just feel like there should be some knowns made into what the public can request and a sense of expectations. I mean, it's only like it sucks. I hate to see the broken hearts out there, like people trying to fight against really bad things, but if it's in the statute, we can't get rid of it unless legislation doesn't. Okay, right.
We have anything else online?
Anyone else on the line? Dana would like to speak.
Dana?
I was thinking about this earlier, when it comes to getting projects just started, interests in projects and getting projects on the list of priority projects, all of that. It would be great if our jurisdictions, well, all of the implementing agencies, I know they do studies, but if there was, and I imagine that they are collecting projects and, you know, through their studies and through a certain number of complaints and things like that, that they put on a list to recommend to put on the LOPP, or find funds for or whatever. But it would be amazing if there was like a hub or like a concerted effort by those implementing agencies once a year or something like that, or a space where people can on in an ongoing way make project suggestions. Um, because it just kind of feels like they pull these projects out of thin air behind closed doors and put them on the list. So I think there's a need at the jurisdiction level, and implementing agency level for a commitment to hearing from the community about what projects they should put on the list and prioritize. That's all. I don't know. That's something for us to all think about advocating for.
I'll just do that briefly. And I know projects is a really big term because it can mean a lot of things, but if it is a planning project, that is what we do here at the TPO. That's a big part of what we do when we develop the Unified Planning Work Program, is ask our committees, ask our partner agencies, our jurisdictions, what planning studies they are looking for, and that helps us form our Unified Planning Work Program. We're not necessarily able to fund all of those projects or do all of those projects, but that is one of those places where we are documenting that, and projects that are in planning that receive federal funding, not PPP, but planning, are supposed to be documented in our Unified Planning Work Program.
Great, yeah, that's,
Yes.
that was it.
That was it.
All right, very good, thank you. Melissa, do you have anything else for us? All right, something else. Oh, you were good enough to come back tonight and answer a number of questions that members of the CAC had at our regular meeting last month. Most of the people, I think, maybe all of the people that asked those questions aren't in the room. They may be online, I'm not sure. And one of them isn't even on the committee anymore because her appointing authority has been removed. Is there a way that we can get the answers to the questions out, if they aren't already, an email or otherwise, to the folks, to everybody? So we don't necessarily have to hear those questions again and the answers again. We come back in June.
So we are planning on sharing this live with the whole committee. They'll be getting an email from me. Forge those emails a lot. And we are recording this session today. And so we will make the recording available as well. So if people are not here, or if you're here and you want to hear it again, you will have access to those live and the recording, and we'll get that out to you as quickly as we can.
Are there any other questions or comments for the good of the order in the room?
I've got one.
Yes, last one. Before you, I just want to note for the record that Dr. Long has been here for the entire meeting. He initially thought it was just going to be a cameo appearance, but obviously we've been so interested that he stayed the entire time. He is now, I guess, excusing himself.
I continue to learn a lot about the programming from Elizabeth's perspective, working at Federal Highway. So I was sticking around because I'm finding this educational even for myself. And I would stay, but I have another meeting. Thank you all.
All right, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I lost my train. Dustin, yeah.
Is there a master plan for transportation? Like if you could have anything you want in the world, is there something like that for Hillsborough County? If not, then is there something in the works?
I think you're looking for our long-range transportation plan.
Well, I hear the long-range transportation plan, and my experience from talking with different people, it seems like, well, these are projects we're planning 25, 30 years down the road. And to me, you're already behind the eight ball. To me, it's, if you have a master plan out there and this plan is in existence, then what you're doing is you're taking that long-range planning document and trying to mirror up what your desired effect is to what you really can do. See what I'm saying?
So the long range transportation plan, I'll let them jump in at any point, is the vision. It has two components. It has the vision of everything that you want. And then it has what you think you can afford to fund. And that looks out from where the transportation improvement program ends. So that's the first 5 years, 5 years. So it takes that year 6 and it looks out for another 20 years past that. This is what we'd like to do in the future. And it's as good as the input we get from our partners in the community who tell us what they'd like to see, plus our expertise that helps look at where we think people are going to live, where they're going to work, what kind of trends there are. We use that to develop the two pieces of that plan. The vision that we have all the money in the world and then what we think we can afford. At the same time that we have that long range plan, you also have each individual government partner who's required to do different things. HART, for example, is required to have a transit development plan that has a different planning horizon year and different requirements that says for 10 years what they think they can afford to fund and what they want to see for transit. At the same time, in Florida, local governments are required to have comprehensive plans with a transportation element. That also speaks to their vision for the city of Tampa and then for Hillsborough County, Plant City, Temple Terrace, of what they'd like to be into. And even within that, Hillsborough County, for example, has a corridor preservation plan, which looks out further than the long-range transportation plan. And that says what corridors they'd like to preserve the right-of-way for in the future. I know that is a lot of different things. The challenge with all of these, I will say, from my very personal opinion, is the funding piece of it. We have all the plans, we can have all the vision, but it's only as much as we can afford to move forward to the next steps. And what happens a lot, Elizabeth mentioned this, I think early in her presentation tonight, is if you get to the planning process and the design process and you don't have money for construction, sometimes you have to redo the design process because the environment around it has changed or the cost of that so much in the time that what you originally thought would cost X amount of money is now doubled. And you finally have X amount of money, but that doesn't do what you want to do. I think that's been a challenge that we've seen a lot in our community and other communities.
Okay. I mean, I guess I just cherish where I grew up at. It seemed like they had a plan that was on the century plan. Because roads that were now in existence, never thought in my mind they would be there. You know, driving across the Indian reservation, trying to figure out why did somebody build overpasses in the middle of the desert? Or were they off their rock? Were they smoking coyote? What was it? And now I go back and it's like, oh, that's why they did that. Got it.
I think some of it might have to do with Florida's roads and how we've grown so fast. I'll give you an example. My dad grew up in Dade County. When there were farms in Dade County. And he went to the University of Florida and he would take Highway 27 because 75 didn't exist. And now, obviously, it looks very different. Now we have 75 and it's growing and different things. So I think some of it is also a mechanism of how Florida has grown.
Gotcha.
Chris, I have a question about the actual hearing. So is there gonna be any changes in terms of protocol, like shifting minutes to another person? You can still get on the phone and comment. It's still gonna be the same as last year, right? Everything? Okay. And then you guys would be, just for purposes of just letting others know if they're interested, just come in the lobby, you would have a desk there, register, get our number. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Sign up by.
Yes, and it's along that line, maybe everybody's already seen this. I think I saw it yesterday or day before. There is a change in the makeup of the TPO board. We don't know, Scalco is off, which is why Christina Costa is no longer with us in this committee. She should come back as an at-large for now. Her appointing authority is not. Bill Carlson is now on the TPO board. I assume he will be making an appointment to this committee at some point in the next 2 to 3 months, but for now, that's a vacant seat. I'm not aware of any other changes on the staff. Do we know who else? Is there anybody else new on the TPO board?
Quick question.
Yeah, just let me get my question answered if you know.
And the other, the newest member probably immediately prior to that change would be Michael Stevens, having joined when Joe O'Connell retired, representing Carolina. And he's been at a couple meetings now already.
Okay. So it should be pretty stable, those two additions.
On the TPO board.
Yeah, okay, Chris,
Non-voting member, but who's gonna represent DOT on?
Justin Hall is the new secretary.
Justin Hall, okay,
And he was at the last TPO board meeting as an advisor.
okay.
all right, any other questions or comments?
I'll just.
All right, yes, sir.
If anybody does think of a question or comment, I really encourage you to share them with me as you think of them, so we can do our best to be prepared in advance of the meeting.
Good. Thank you all for coming. This was, for extra credit, nobody had to be here, so I appreciate the effort, both here and online. Thank you for taking the time. We're adjourned. Be great if we can figure out a way to transition this into a presentation, actually, association.